Good morning, everyone. Week 5, 10 games, 10 early games here. I'm Sigmund Bloom. You got to my, see, I get messed up there to my left, but it actually looks like my right. Wildman and the man down there. Dr. Gene Bramwell. Dr. Gene, we got a lot. Man, we got a lot to go over this morning. So let's jump in, dispose of the pleasantries, and let's actually start with the game tonight. Because again, 10 games coming up at 1 o'clock Eastern, only 2, although Green Bay, Dallas, one of them, at 4 o'clock Eastern, and Kansas City, Indianapolis, which becomes a more interesting matchup, Gene, with T.Y. Hilton. But do our lineups become more interesting or maybe more rife with risk if we put Hilton in our lineups tonight?
There's always time for pleasantries, isn't there?
There should be. I mean, that's really. Thank you for that. See, we're switching roles now. Thank you for that.
I think I wrote yesterday that Hilton was the toughest call of the weekend. I'm not really going to come off of that stand very much. There was a report this morning that he was expected to play, and this is what we've seen from Hilton in the past. He will generally recover a little bit more quickly than expected, make progress sooner than expected, play more effectively than expected, even through some of these relatively limiting soft tissue strains. The little bit of difference with this one is it's an aggravated injury, which means that it wasn't given enough time to heal the first time. It usually takes a little bit more time to get over than when it's aggravated. And we really don't know where things stand. But he told us last Friday that he was making more progress than he thought. He was able to take some practice this week, which was good. The beat writers in Indianapolis have been pretty positive and optimistic, at least about the potential of Hilton playing all week long. So that never changed. And I would think that with a bye week staring Indianapolis in the face next week, if Hilton is active, it's telling you that they're probably not just using him as a decoy, that he's likely to get some playing time and get close to his usual number of targets. And we've seen that happen before. I think I told folks this morning to try to have a hedge on the roster for a Sunday night or a Monday night option if you've got either Hilton or Mack, who we'll talk about here in a little bit as well, just in case. But it looks like Hilton is on track to play. Really hard to guess how well he'll play, but I think I'd err on the side of him being probable at this point and hopefully effective.
And then let's just stay on the Colts side of it, because we're going to spend a while in this game. It's an important game for fantasy. Marlon Mack, who is more of a true game time decision tonight. Gene, what's your final call, at least based on what we know now?
I think I'm a little bit concerned about Mack. Now, a couple of weeks ago, and this has been the case with Frank Reich, where we just won't see players practice, and then they may do a little bit on Friday, and then see pretty much their usual workload, because the team has known from the beginning that, well, we're just not going to put them out there and practice on Wednesday and Thursday. Let them do a little bit on Friday to make sure that they just get into the flow of the week a little bit, and then let them go. And that's what happened a couple of weeks ago with Mack and a calf strain. And you'd normally think that soft tissue injuries are a little bit more concerning than an ankle joint type situation. But in this case, unlike what we just said with Hilton, the Colts beat writers have not been optimistic about Mack. Sort of the tone has been this is a little bit more than what the calf injury was. It's a little bit more even than the team is letting on. Frank Reich said last Monday that that Mack not playing in the second half was more of a personnel decision, a package decision based on them being in a hurry up situation, which I don't know that they were throughout the second half. He took 2 carries in the second half, Mack did, and didn't return, more than it was an injury situation. Stephen Holder had quotes from Mack throughout the week saying his status was murky and they really weren't sure how things were going to go. And even though he fully practiced on Friday, there's still some level of concern. Also, Will Carroll, who is back writing some injury features again, has always been plugged into the Indianapolis scene, had was frankly just kind of a blurb in the bottom of his feature, but said this may be a little bit more serious than expected, and Mack may not be able to play at all this week. So this seems like a situation where the totality of the evidence doesn't really go with the full Friday practice. I think I'm leaning towards Mack playing, but if you keep Mack on your lineup on Sunday night, you absolutely have to have some other option that you can put in instead. And I think it's very likely we'll see him take a little bit fewer snaps than usual on Sunday night. So I was hoping to get a little bit of context from Adam Schefter or Ian Rappaport overnight, and we got nothing on Mack, and we got Hilton is expected to play, and that's all. So it's going to be a tough call. Make sure you've got some other options just in case. I am a little bit more optimistic about Hilton than Mack, but neither one of them are probably as safe as their full Friday practice would suggest.
Yeah. So Matt, now Gene gives us the information, but we have to make fantasy football calls. First on Hilton, and we have pivots, and you can handle this all at once. And I am wearing pants. I love that the chat room's like, I'm never actually. You all never get to see what happens outside of the frame. And today we peel back the veil a little bit. But Matt, and we can really also handle these things, and we can throw this all in one big basket, right? Because what do we have as alternatives? Really quickly, Gene, do you have anything on Rashard Higgins right now?
No, not much, other than it's hard to be optimistic when he's been practicing off and on for 2 weeks and never active.
Right.
So if he plays, you feel like it's going to be a pretty limited role at best.
So, and Antonio Callaway also will be limited, at least according to the coaches, but he will play. So Matt, we've got a big bucket here that includes like Antonio Callaway, any 49ers receiver you want, Goodwin or Samuel or Dante Pettis, any 49ers running back you want. Remember, you can always put these guys in your flex to give yourself maximum flexibility whenever it comes to these Sunday night lineup decisions. So we've got Mostert, and Tevin Coleman, Gene.
Sorry, I got to take myself off
Yeah,
mute
no,
while
no.
I'm
Please.
teasing you on Twitter over your
Thank you.
bedroom discussion here. Tevin Coleman, this was the target. Week 5 was the target all along. Even though he's been limited in practice, beat writers have said he's doing almost everything that's been that's been asked of him this week and is expected to play. Again, rotational role with the other backs that they have there. There's almost a 4-headed monster now. But he's going to play.
So we've got all 4 of the running backs, Matt. We've got even, like Ricky Seals-Jones. But more importantly, when we look at the Sunday night game now, and we're going to talk about the Chiefs side, but we still have Mecole Hardman and Demarcus Robinson, which might become more interesting depending on what Dr. Gene says. But we've got Zach Pascal. We've got Chester Rogers. We've got Jordan Wilkins. We've got Naeem Hines. So starting with T.Y. Hilton, what's your general advice for folks with Hilton? Do you think they should just chance it because, hey, it's T.Y. Hilton, anytime he's on the field you have to play him, or do you want to comment on the vast, actually pretty generous amount of hedges available to us for our Sunday night lineup decisions?
Well, certainly I think that if you're in a league where you have PPR upside and you're looking for an opportunity to replace T.Y. Hilton, I think what you're hoping with T.Y. Hilton is what he did against Atlanta, but Atlanta has had a toothless secondary, and so when he played that first half and scored and promptly haven't seen him on the field since, you're looking at a player whose upside this week is probably similar, which is going to be a few receptions, maybe a big play out of that. So that puts him on the level of a guy like Ricky Seals-Jones that you might want to consider in a PPR format. I don't think you're going to find any of the Chiefs receivers available to you in a PPR format. If you do, obviously, if Mecole Hardman or the what's the
Demarcus Robinson,
Demarcus Robinson, yeah,
or Byron Pringle,
yeah, and that's a guy that I was going to mention as Pringle. Is that if you're in a very, very deep league, you may want to look into him as a possibility because he is getting playing time in terms of some snaps, and he did get some snaps in the red zone last week against Detroit, and actually made a pretty nice play that got him close to scoring a touchdown. So they're feeling confident about using him, and he has looked pretty good in very, very limited looks. I think that those types of guys are probably on equal footing with any of the 49ers backs that you're going to be able to get, because we don't know who's going to be the fourth guy left off of this, because it's probably still going to be a 3-headed look. And I think somebody's going to get left out of this equation in that backfield. And so that's going to be a difficult one to forecast. And then, you could even look at a guy like Dontrell Hilliard and maybe consider him as also as someone that maybe he'll get some looks here and there that might be worthwhile for you. But I think I would always roll with someone who's slated to start and likely replace somebody's touches. And to me, that was Dontrell Hilliard with David Njoku and how he was used. Certainly we could go back to some of these receivers and whether they're going to play in Cleveland and whether they replace that. And certainly if Higgins were healthy enough to go, that would be an option right there. Callaway is kind of too up and down, I think, at this stage to, that would be a risky shot. So, I mean, this is one of those that my advice to you is just plug in the one that you probably have the best feeling about. But if you're gonna ask me, I think Seals Jones is probably it.
Any reason to mess with Marlon Mack? I mean, Kansas City is a good matchup, and the Colts certainly will want to establish the run. I mean, Plan A should be keep away from Patrick Mahomes. But in light of what Dr. Gene said, do you just put him on your bench right now and not bother with it?
I would, and I just dropped a player to pick up Jordan Wilkins just to see how that might play out later this afternoon. But I think that they're probably leaning towards giving him some rest because it's a long season, and I think them trying to pull this thing with like what they're doing with Hilton, I don't think they're going to do that with Mac.
And then, am I crazy to think that Nyheim Hines might catch 7, 8, 9, 10 passes, maybe just in the second half alone?
No, I mean, I think that's definitely a possibility. It's just I think it just depends on what type of advantages they're getting in certain looks, because it could easily be Jack Doyle who gets that. It could even be, Butterfingers Eric Ebron being able to do that a little bit. And if he can shore that up, or, find maybe an empty can of Stickum and stick his hands in there that Fred Biletnikoff left in the visiting locker room somewhere,
True Raider style. Okay. Gene, on the other side of this matchup, Sammy Watkins. And, if it was any other player or most other players, we might say, it doesn't sound like a big deal. But it's Sammy Watkins. Usually things end up being a bigger deal with him than they seem at the outset. But we're getting some reassurance. Are you part of the reassurance, or are you going to give us pause if we're waiting on Sammy Watkins tonight?
Yeah, I think so. And I think you're right. I think the main reason we have any concern about this at all is because of Watkins' injury history and seemingly history of aggravations and slow to recovery from, what he's had from feet to shoulders and other things in the past. But it's really been any indication that limited Thursday or Friday practice is a concern. There wasn't anything from the beat writers, and I know we've had a little bit more, or a little bit less rather, discussion about injuries from Kansas City than we've had in the past, but doesn't seem to be any concern. There were a couple of quick tweets overnight that said he was expected to play. I don't see any indication that this is a big situation. Maybe we find out differently tomorrow, but I wouldn't have too much pause about putting him in lineups.
And Damian Williams. I mean, like I said, we're going to spend 15 minutes. We're at about 15 minutes on this game. Damian Williams may be the one out of all four of these very important fantasy players, Mac, Hilton, Watkins, and Damian Williams. He's the one that it seems like, you can correct me if you want, that has the best chance of playing at full strength and playing his full complement of snaps.
Yeah, whatever that may be, right?
Right. Right. Going all the way back to solving the Kansas City backfield. Exactly.
Now we've got Darrell Williams inserting himself in that picture a little bit more than he would have in week one. But yeah, I think of all these players, I think you're right. He's likely the healthiest. He had a full week of practice, which was a little bit of surprise because he hadn't really done anything in the 2 weeks before. You figured that maybe there was going to be some conditioning issues that he'd have to work through with some limited practice. But no, he's right back to a full practice on Wednesday. Backed it up with consecutive practices on Thursday and Friday. The Thursday practice being the most meaningful because it's the biggest practice of the week, and because it shows that his Wednesday full practice he responded very well to. So, when I was writing things up Wednesday and yesterday, just trying to get a sense of how much Williams would play and looking through everybody's projections on our website, and everybody seemed to think it would be about an even split, similar to what it was before. So I'll let you guys talk about what that may mean for playing time purposes. But yes, it looks like they have prepared from the beginning of the week for him to play. So whatever the thought process is going to be with his game plan earlier in the year is likely what we'll see. I think it probably stands to reason that he just replaces Darrell Williams, and we don't see too much change with LaShawn McCoy, who is healthy and not on the injury report at all this week. But like you said, kind of divining what's going to go on with Andy Reid has not been so easy this year already.
And just, I'll let you off the hook and catch your breath. No Darius Leonard tonight, so that's another reason to like Damian Williams. And he did get closer to returning this week. Is that correct?
I hope that's what happened. I hope that this was part of the gradual return to play protocol, and that the 3 limited practices were planned. But the beat writers thought that he had a chance to play, and then kind of didn't get cleared and didn't get cleared early. So you hope that there wasn't a Friday setback, and that we see him to limited to full practice next week and is through the bye week and is good to go. Just, as we talked about with Hilton and Mac, with that bye week there, and the fact that he had already taken a couple of weeks to recover, maybe it was just considered the better part of valor. But again, these guys, if they're they're healthy enough to play, usually they come back. So either this was part of the plan, or we're going to hear about a setback through the bye week, and hopefully that doesn't prove to be the case.
And Tyreek Hill probably back next week.
Yeah, it looks like it. They've allowed him to do anything but contact. Kind of 4 to 5 to 6 weeks, somewhere in there was the sweet spot. So there was a chance that maybe we wouldn't see him until week 7, closer to 6-week recovery. But everything he's done over the past couple of weeks has been reassuring, and it would be, at this point, I think it'd be a surprise to not see him return to a full practice and prepare to play in week 6.
Okay, and then we can finally turn the page on this game. Although, again, rife with fantasy opportunity, Matt. Sammy Watkins is the answer. Just play him if you got him. Have a hedge in your back pocket. But come on, it's Sammy Watkins, no Tyreek Hill against the Colts without Malik Hooker. This is not difficult.
Correct.
And the Colts, and the Chiefs backs, if you have Damian Williams, if you have LaShawn McCoy, running back hasn't been exactly a rosy picture in fantasy this year. If you have McCoy, Damian Williams, you're very likely playing them tonight.
I would say so, and you're benching Darrell Williams.
Right. I'm not throwing him back to the waiver wire, though, because things can change very quickly. Okay. And then let's get to this crazy 10-game slate we have. I guess we can start with, and it seems like the nature of the NFL this year that there's going to be 3 or 4 throwaway games, and I guess that's good because we have to pay attention to 10 games coming up here. Gene, Terry McLaurin. And again, it's so odd to me that teams, I don't understand why the Colts are taking a chance with T.Y. Hilton. I'm not sure why the Washington would take a chance with McLaurin, but it does sound like McLaurin might get a lesson from Stephon Gilmore on the field in real time today.
Yeah, I guess. Gruden said he was 50-50 on Friday. I think, and maybe I'm reading too much of this into this, but, earlier in the week, McLaurin kind of admitted that soft tissue injuries are not something to be playing around with, where, maybe you try to play through a joint situation, but McLaurin said, these, and not that this is the first time he's probably dealt with something like this, but maybe what was described as a minor pull last week really is a minor pull, and they were trying to be cautious. But Gruden didn't seem too optimistic about him. I know there's been a ton of stuff going on in Washington between the quarterback situation and Trent Williams and everything else, and Gruden is probably just getting tired of answering questions on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But I don't feel great about this. It certainly seems like he's trending toward plan, but there's really not been anything, unlike the Hilton situation and some of the others where you feel okay about it. I don't feel great about this. We don't have a lot of history with McLaurin to know how he's going to play through these sorts of injuries, but the tone of the reports this week have me a little bit nervous about him.
In the Washington side, you're leaving all of your Washington players on the bench. Maybe Chris Thompson as an emergency play. But, Matt, again, we have to sort out New England's offense, and we won't have to at least worry about Rex Burkhead. And we're not worried about Damian Williams yet, but just be on alert if you have an extra roster spot at the end of all of the churning and you set your lineups and what do I do with it? If Damian Harris is out there, maybe he gets a little more opportunity in the second half here in mop-up role. But what about when it's not in mop-up mode, Matt? Who do you like most, and who are the players that, if you're looking on your lineup and you have Patriots, who gives you pause, and who are you absolutely not leaving on your bench this week as New England faces Washington?
I think you still continue to start Josh Gordon. I think you have to give him that opportunity. I think that's going to round it into shape. Julian Edelman, he didn't seem to play all that well with the chest injury last week, so I would hope that he will play a little bit better. I'd like to hear from Dr. Gene a little bit about that. But if it seems like that he should be healthier and ready to go, then you definitely want to start him. Ben Watson being back this week is somebody that
not playing though. For some reason, he didn't make the trip. It was baffling to me. He's not going to be playing this week. So anyway,
so then there's really, you wouldn't look at anything at the tight end situation there. Philip Dorsett, certainly a guy that has played well, so you continue probably looking to him. And I'd say that really at this point, New England's one of those teams that they're players that you're probably going to continue to start and just cross your fingers with, because we don't really know at this stage how it's shaping up just yet. I think the next 3 to 4 weeks is going to be very telling for us to see who we rely upon.
And I'm still optimistic about Philip Dorsett today. Dorsett's the one guy that I mean, if you're going to play Josh Gordon, probably. Gene, give us the latest on Julian Edelman, as Matt asked for.
I'm not too worried about Edelman. I feel like that was a big deal from the beginning. That hedge tweet that we talked about from Ian Rappaport last week, Edelman played 70 some snaps, I think, like 96%. I can't remember exactly what I wrote there, but something really reassuring and didn't have any signs of a setback. Don't usually worry about limited practices for guys in New England if they're at least doing something on Wednesday and played, other than the Rex Burkhead situation last week, I guess. But Edelman's in a little bit different category. I don't think he's going to be too much trouble this week.
So you're probably playing Gordon. You're probably playing Edelman, hoping for the best. But Dorsett's the one that could be the big hit against the Washington secondary. You're almost certainly playing Sony Michel. This is a game that if he still looks like he's running in wet cement and there's still not holes there, as we get closer to Damian Harris, James White is a little more questionable because he seems to be the best in the games that are competitive. Don't expect this one to be competitive. Buffalo, Tennessee should be competitive. I like that on the NFL Twitter feed, they referenced the Music City Miracle, a rematch of that game. So Josh Allen, Gene, getting cleared over the weekend. It's anything to be worried about here. His status was up in doubt until yesterday, I think. Should we treat this like trust if we're looking at Josh Allen as an option, or should that give us pause?
Yeah, he's cleared to play. So in that, this isn't similar to other injuries where he may not be able to do everything that's asked of him. Hopefully the change that's made this week is that he's a little bit more cognizant of where he is when he's outside the pocket and maybe not looking to get that extra half a yard by putting his head in harm's way. And it's just it's a technique decision more than a game plan decision. And no, the Bills had 3 people that needed to go to the independent neurologist toward the end of the week this week, including their fullback, Patrick DeMarco, and all were cleared. So the full Friday practice suggested that the Bills were comfortable with how things were going on, wanted to give him one more day to see how he responded to that increase in activity level, was cleared. So they wouldn't have been sent to the independent neurologist if they weren't planning on playing him at full strength. So no, and we'll kind of spare the longer discussion about concussions and risk of future concussions and things like that. But if he's cleared to go, I don't see any limitation for him.
And Devin Singletary, and I almost feel like, Gene, whenever we have running backs and wide receivers that are coming back from hamstring injuries, this is like the Terry McLaurin situation. You have their what their normal outlook would be for this game for fantasy, and then you kind of have that exclamation point warning over it that it could be anything down to 0. So the ceiling may be intact, but the floor is 0. Is that basically what we're looking at if Devin Singletary is playing?
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. And the latest thing with Singletary is he's out there testing his hamstring injury in Tennessee. I don't think there's any decision that's been made. He's still within the window of high risk of aggravation, but he's getting closer and closer to being out of that. He's had 5 consecutive limited practices, so that sounds pretty good. Sean McDermott told folks on Wednesday that Singletary was in fact close to playing last week. We had talked about whether or not it was just a little bit of a, is there any way we can get as many skill position players on the field as we can facing New England? But it did really seem like he was pretty close to playing. So I think the trend is positive. Hopefully this pregame workout goes well. And again, you guys can talk about this, but we don't have a lot of history with Singletary. He's probably going to be more involved in the passing game than anything else. So a relatively tough road matchup. It's hard to see him get more than 10 touches, I think, just based on what my predictions would look like there. Maybe there's a little bit more going on, but I'm optimistic he plays, but I don't feel great about him getting a ton of touches.
Yeah, I would generally agree with what you said, and because if we knew he was the dedicated passing down back, because we saw TJ Yeldon get like 4 for 63 on receptions last week. We've seen Singletary break some big runs, but I'm not quite sure what his role will be. And Matt, I'll pass it to you this way: will any game today be more boring for fantasy matchups than Buffalo at Tennessee?
I'm sure that there will be, actually. To be honest, I actually think that this game could be actually kind of fun because Matt Barkley's a confident thrower, which often means that he targets downfield with pretty good accuracy. I would not be surprised if Buffalo jumps up to an early lead and makes this a tight game and actually outplays what we've seen from Josh Allen, in some of his bad weeks. So I'm actually okay with this. I think the Washington New England game is going to be far more boring than this one.
Well, that's true. What me on the New England side, although I do want to say, I think, that Josh Allen was cleared yesterday, Matt.
Okay.
So, and I agree with you.
So.
Well, and I agree with you on Matt Bark. I was actually a little more optimistic. I got ribbed for this a little bit when I said I would earlier in the week when we were doing the preview. I said I might be more optimistic about this passing game, and I like Josh Allen, but I might be more optimistic about this passing game if Matt Barkley was the quarterback. He actually made some good throws he could have brought them back into that game to win against New England last week.
If Beasley and Brown didn't drop passes,
Yeah.
there were certainly opportunities there.
They were right there. And then we'll see Tennessee, of course. Tennessee, well, this is a good transition here, Matt. Well, for now, I'll let Dr. Gene interject, but Tennessee facing a real defense, not the Atlanta Falcons defense. Guess who else is going to face the Atlanta Falcons defense? We think, Gene. Kiki Cutie, tell me it's true.
Good luck, everybody.
Kenny Stills, very unlikely to go in this one.
That was the word this morning. He's got more than one soft to his shoe injury going on. Feel very confident with him. Was able to get some limited practices in, but just didn't make enough progress. So it looks like he's going to be inactive.
So Matt, this is one where I think that you can definitely weigh in with some emphasis because you've watched that Atlanta defense every week, sometimes having to hold your nose to do it. And we've seen from the Houston Texans, at home against Jacksonville, at home against Carolina, frustrated Deshaun Watson. Against the Saints defense on the road, against the Chargers defense on the road. Fantastic highlights for your fantasy team. He's at home, but he is against the Atlanta defense. How confident are you that this is a get right week for DeAndre Hopkins, Will Fuller, yes, maybe even Kiki Cutie?
I think it's a very good week for that because, Trufant has not played extremely well. Isaiah Oliver is also the weak spot. He's going to get picked on an awful lot. And even worse than that is that because they lost their safety, KZ, and they're in a situation where this underbelly of the Falcons defense is toothless at this point. I mean, they don't, even during their Super Bowl runs, they have not been able to tackle well in the open field. They miss angles, they miss tackles all the time. They're great if you want to run outside and watch Deion Jones run sideline to sideline, or if you want him to penetrate downhill, in that aspect of the game. But have a receiver run in the middle of the field and catch the ball in the open field. And these guys turn, an 8-yard gain and they end up allowing it to be an 18 or 28-yard gain because of the fact that they just aren't very good at this level, at this part of the of defense. So Kiki QT is going to operate in the middle of the field, I think, an awful lot, or at least out into the flats. And if he makes the first man miss with Atlanta, there's a good chance he's going to make the second and the third one miss too. So it's hard because you look at him and a guy like Josh Gordon or a guy like Marquise Brown, and those guys you would normally say, I'm going to start players like him. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if Kiki QT has the upside to do better than those two guys in terms of, what type of tier you would compare him to.
And really quickly, Matt, is it Carlos Hyde against that weary Atlanta defense that had to try to tackle Derrick Henry 27 times on carries last week? Is it Duke Johnson? Is it both, or is it none of the above in this one?
I think it's both because Duke Johnson is going to be one of those guys making Deion Jones and Devondre Campbell and Duke Riley or whoever else they throw out there miss. And then I think also as long as you can block Grady Jarrett, there's nothing else on this defense that I think stands out. Alan Bailey will come up with some good opportunities every once in a while in terms of what he can do. But I think more than anything, we saw with the Vikings and how they ran through the Atlanta Falcons in week 1, that it was basically if you game plan against Grady Jarrett, there's a lot of opportunities there. And the other defensive tackle that's on the Falcons roster, I don't remember his name, but he's weak in terms of being able to face against the run. And so I think that you go for starting either one or both of those Houston backs.
Basically, the outlook for Houston is everything should work. But on the Atlanta side, we have these alternative pictures, Matt, of the Atlanta offense. When things are working, Matt Ryan to Julio Jones, Matt Ryan to Calvin Ridley. And by the way, Gene, real quick, is Calvin Ridley on your radar at all? Because last year, once he was on the injury report, it seemed like his game lost a lot of oomph. He has been on the injury report. Is anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I didn't take a close look at him this week. He definitely seems like he's been limited. You guys know what his target counts have been like. I always like to kind of get a sense and look at the trend of where we are snap wise and target
Yeah.
wise. It looks like the targets were back up last week in comparison to where they were. It may be that the routes he's running or finishing aren't as, he's not getting as many looks downfield as he was before, and that's part of the issue. Or teams are Atlanta's just game planning differently because they know the injury. Doesn't look too limited to me in a little bit of time that I've looked at him, but yeah, I think if this continues, knowing what type of player he is and knowing how Atlanta's used him successfully in the past, then yeah, I think we'll need to be concerned. But I don't see too much right now.
The Ridley Riddle, we could call it. He's like the sports car. I feel like Gene, there are players that are sports cars, and if there's anything out to him, but like Gene laid out, Matt, is it potentially that, or is it just the downfield passing game? Atlanta can't block anybody. Matt Ryan can't operate when he's under pressure. But what we see is Matt Ryan's going to throw for 300 yards regardless. He'll throw for 300 yards probably against the Texans today too. Is that going to be more Sanu and Hooper? Or is that going to maybe be some Julio and Ridley down at the schoolyard?
It's going to be actually Hooper and Julio. And Hooper is probably your safest bet in Atlanta right now in terms of the number of targets that he's getting, the type of targets that he's getting, because now they're actually using him in the short and intermediate ranges of the field as opposed to occasionally short and a lot of dumb long throws that they were using under Sarkisian. So I think that you're seeing an increased comfort level with him in terms of Ryan to Hooper. And then with Julio's going to definitely get his every week. It just depends on what quarter that's going to come. Ridley, the issue I think is due to the pass rush and partially due to the injury. I think that Sanu, while a really competent receiver, really good receiver, it's hard to predict how many when he's going to go off and get his opportunities. There's some weeks it's more likely that Devonta Freeman is going to get more catches and more targets than Sanu, even though, Sanu's a guy they love to target on third down. So, you look at it from that standpoint, I'd say that in order, Jones, Hooper, actually in upside, Jones, Hooper, and Freeman are probably the three guys that you're going to be looking at this weekend. Even though Freeman hasn't been great, the line has done a little bit better job of blocking, and Houston's defense has been actually pretty giving to running backs so far this year. So I wouldn't shy away from Freeman this week, even though his production hasn't been fantastic.
Gee, when I think about Jalen Ramsey, I really want to ask you, because you sometimes have a way to see through this stuff where we don't. What's going to happen with Jalen Ramsey? Like, what's this all about anyway? But from what you can tell, how much of this is an injury related legitimately, and just close the book, if you will, on this chapter, week 5 in the Jalen Ramsey saga?
Well, no, I tend not to be a conspiracy theorist, but it's a little bit suspicious that we didn't hear about a back issue until after the request to be traded and until after the Jaguars said, no, you're going to play. But, maybe there is something there, as we've talked about many times. Lots and lots of players have some degenerative back conditions and they can crop up at any time. Maybe he was playing through something and just not going in for treatment and not letting folks know that it was a limiting condition. And now that he would have to pass a physical if he were traded. There's a little bit more of a concern. He was reported to see a specialist. So, who knows whether this is gamesmanship on Ramsey's part to continue to try to force a trade, or if it is trying to keep himself in peak physical condition so that when he is traded, if that happens, the other team doesn't fail him on a physical and send him back to Jacksonville. So, already been ruled out this week. It certainly seems like a week-to-week situation. Hopefully we don't hear that it's concerning enough where he's going to need injections or surgery or something more significant. But, we're just going to see how this progresses. My gut tells me it's a little bit more part 1 than part 2, but I think we'll find out here sometime during October.
And on the other side of this very intriguing matchup, no Dante Jackson for Carolina today?
Correct.
So each team down their number 1 corner, Matt. And first of all, I want to take a moment out to say, I did this on Twitter earlier this week. Kyle Allen versus Gardner Minshew is an actual NFL matchup, and it's a good one. It's an interesting one. It's going to be an entertaining, interesting game. Let's look first at, I guess, the Jacksonville side, and we can look at Gardner Minshew as a quarterback to super flex type. DJ Chark, if we're going to play a receiver. I just love that we can talk about James O'Shaughnessy scoring touchdowns and doing things. But I guess let's focus here on Chark because he won't have to play Dante Jackson. We'll probably see James Bradbury. Are you giving people a nudge over the fence and say put him in your lineup, or you give them a nudge back and say, hey, this Carolina defense is still pretty tough? And Gene, real quick, Brian Burns. I thought things were trending up for him as we went through the week.
Yes, full Friday practice. The report overnight was that he was going to play. The injury happened kind of when he slammed his hand down, and if X-rays are negative, they're probably just giving him some time for the swelling to go down and to not risk, any potential aggravation of some range of motion issues. But he's going to play.
So this Carolina defense, even with Kawan Short on IR, even without Dante Jackson, this is a tough defense. Gardner Minshew, we've loved the story. Can he do enough with DJ Chark today to make Chark a worthy play?
Yeah, I think he can, and I think a lot of it has to do with offensive line play, because when you look at the teams that didn't perform well against the Carolina Panthers, Houston Texans don't have a great offensive line. We know that Arizona doesn't have a good offensive line, and they have a rookie quarterback who, as much as we talk, heap of love of tons of promise onto him, still has moments where he's just bad. And then we have, Tampa Bay, which might be the best offensive line of the four that have played, and Chris Godwin racked up 121 yards and a touchdown. Even Mike Evans on a bad day at 4 for 61. And when you look at the Los Angeles Rams, and they're also a bad offensive line. So I think the Jacksonville is a better offensive line. They play also more from a downhill look in terms of working downhill, quarterback under center, opens up play action for them fairly well. And you have an aggressive quarterback in Gardner Minshew who's displayed pretty good skill in the vertical game. And DJ Chark, honestly, there's moments that he looks like a Pro Bowl player this year.
I know.
So
Truly, really, truly, and the time we've been doing this together, Matt, 13 years or something like that. Have you ever seen a more dramatic transformation of a player from year one to year two?
We might have, but I can't remember anybody.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it, is the interesting thing. And like people ask, well, what happened with DJ Chark is that the good thing about him was always that he made very difficult catches in college. He always did that. It was just the fact that his technique was awful doing it. So that's hard to predict, to say you're going to predict success doing that, because most of the time guys like that are like Quincy Enunwa, who had to rework their hands, and it took them a couple years to do that. And even so, they still experienced drops. With Chark, that wasn't the case. So you can kind of say that in his case, great hand-eye coordination and focus won out over bad technique, and then he was able to adjust his technique and still be able to do that. But that's not a common issue or common fix that you normally see with players, and his game's fully blossomed as a result of it.
It's a thing to behold. Will it be a thing to behold, DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel not having to see Jalen Ramsey in this one? Last week, it was a good game, that Houston Carolina game. It was some well-timed sack strip fumbles by Houston, or else it would have been a more lopsided game. Kyle Allen moved the offense pretty well, but mainly through Christian McCaffrey. Very little Greg Olsen, very little Curtis Samuel, very little DJ Moore. Matt, do we expect that to reverse a little this week against Jacksonville because there's no Jalen? I mean, Joe Flacco was able to throw the ball well to his guys last week. Noah Fant scored. Cortland Sutton scored twice. Emmanuel Sanders went over 100 yards. Are you optimistic about those Panthers pass catchers today?
A little more, but you just don't know who's not facing AJ Bouye. So that's kind of the issue, is that will there be somebody who gets a predominant number of targets against him? And I would say that looking at it from the perspective of who gets the most yardage, it was Emmanuel Sanders, Adam Humphries the week before that. Then it was kind of even across the board for the Texans in a very bad game, and then Sammy Watkins. So it's who kind of works to the inside the best. And the answer is, well, both receivers work well to the inside, but I'm going to lean towards DJ Moore as the guy who's going to be the beneficiary a little bit more. So if you're going to pick a guy from Carolina who I think is most likely to have a good week, I think it's going to be Moore running those dig routes over the middle. He runs those better than Samuel, who's also been focused more as their outside guy, going deep and being able to be that vertical option. So I think Moore is probably the most likely in for like a 70 to 80 yard game and maybe a touchdown.
All right, Gene, they're doing it. They're doing it. They're pulling me back in. The Steelers emotionally. I had to restrain myself. I had to restrain myself from wearing the 26 shirts. They do great work. The Lego Steelers guy waving the terrible towel. But so this was odd, Gene, because if we talked Thursday about the Steelers, I think we might have. It was looking very optimistic for Juju Smith-Schuster, not so much for James Conner. Come Friday, now we're optimistic about James Conner. He's not even on the injury report. And Juju, a true game time decision. And it ain't like Juju was giving us a lot of confidence in our lineups to begin with. So how can we make sense out of this reversal over the course of the week with these two players?
So I thought Vance McDonald was the least likely of the three to play on Thursday night when we talked. I wasn't too worried about Connor, and I wasn't that worried about Smith-Schuster either. Connor's injury didn't seem to be significant on video. He came back and played. He'd been on radio shows saying he was going to play all week long, so this was kind of the expectation. And not to belabor this point, but the Steelers are doing things a little bit differently with their injured players than they have in the past by restricting their practice participation and then allowing them to play as they usually would before. The issue with Connor is it also looks like the Steelers are doing a little bit differently with their running back snaps than what they've done in the past. We're not seeing one player take 85, 90, 95%. Connor hasn't really taken that share all year long. So even if there is a little bit of a ding to the ankle, you're not likely to see him take more than 65 to 75% of the snaps anyhow. Smith-Schuster is a different issue. He was back to a full practice on Friday, which seems reassuring. But everything that we've been told over these last 48 hours is that he's very much a true game time decision. Even though he was listed as full, he said he did the bare minimum in practice on Friday. He's been dealing with this toe sprain off and on since week 1. When it first occurred, week 2, his first week back, his snaps dropped down to the high 70%, 80% range. His targets didn't change all that much. But again, as you kind of hinted at, it seems like this is a larger issue with the Pittsburgh offense with Mason Rudolph, who said he was going to try to get Smith-Schuster involved more this week. But, between the toe issue, which as we've seen with Devontae Adams, who's not going to play this week and potentially beyond, it's a big issue for wide receivers. It's limited him in the past. He's not done much in practice. There's issues with the offense. Baltimore secondary isn't entirely intact with Jimmy Smith out again this week, but it's not a great matchup either. So lots of reasons to be concerned about Smith-Schuster. I think the full practice suggests that they're going to give him every shot of playing. We're going to know here in an hour or so anyway. But I think you have to be nervous about how many snaps he's going to take, how effectively he's going to play, and whether or not Pittsburgh's going to be able to make good on their thought process of getting him more involved in the offense.
So, Matt, there's a lot to sort through here from a fantasy perspective for Pittsburgh. And we talked about this Thursday night, but let's revisit it. Even though Connor looks good to go, do you pause because of how well Jalen Samuels played and that the door is open now to this being a committee, and maybe it should have been a committee all along?
I mean, I just look at it this way, is that when you see what Connor did, the previous week, I think that that's probably one of the things that you're going to probably want to consider is, how good of a player can he be in a committee? And even last week, he had 8 catches for 83 yards and a touchdown.
Now, the Steelers going to go to that Rivers to Gordon and Eckler model that I was talking about Thursday night. Like when you're projecting them this week, are you thinking they're the number 2 and 3 receivers or the running backs?
Yeah, I think they are, because they're going to try and spread the field horizontally, because apparently they're hiding him in the vertical game. And I think a lot of it has to do mainly more with being on the same page with these receivers and being able to make good decisions reading the coverage. It's not that he's inaccurate downfield. He's very good downfield, on a just 1-to-1 scenario throwing the ball. But I think that they're trying to spread the field wider and to force the defense to play sideline to sideline more, which does benefit these backs. And I agree with you. It's probably going to be more of a Chargers type backfield situation, which means I have no hesitation. I just actually inserted James Conner in my lineup now over Julian Edelman in a 2 wide receiver or 3 wide receiver or one back or two wide receiver, two back type of starting lineup. Just because I'm very confident in Connor being able to get yardage, both as a receiver and a runner, and inside the red zone if they ever get there this week.
Is Deontay Johnson for real, or is this just all the attention that teams are giving Juju? And yeah, there is going to be that one time a game that he gets free, which means if it doesn't cause his toe to like fall off, play Juju as a decoy so that Deontay Johnson can get the good coverage. What do you think of him through 2 games and how it affects choices, lineup choices for him this week?
I think long term he has a shot of being for real. Short term, I still think he's a bit inconsistent. And then you still have a quarterback who, they're having to protect and hide a little bit. So I'm not as optimistic about him, over the next series of games. But then again, if you're in that quandary of who are players on my bench that I'd have to start because I don't know about T.Y. Hilton, right, you can add him to the list and feel probably stronger about him than the guys that we talked about at the beginning.
Okay, so and this is more on the couch therapy for me, Matt, because in my mind's eye, all I see is Lamar Jackson up and down the field. Mark Andrews running free in the middle of the field. Marquise Brown, the guy's missing tackles on him. Mark Ingram rumbling through openings, and just in general, the Steelers looking flummoxed because this is a game where it could all be forgiven. If the Steelers can win this week, it's all forgiven. It's like we get a real reboot on the season. It's too good to be true. Is this again my Steelers neuroses, or are you also very optimistic about Lamar Jackson against the Steelers?
Would you go to a therapy session as a Steelers fan and you walk into the office and you see Browns paraphernalia everywhere?
Right. Who needs therapy?
Would you really do that? Would you stay in that office? I'm not sure I would.
Right.
That's all I'd have to say.
That's the chapter here. I thought you were going to say, would you go to a ttherapy session with no pants on? Because that's the real story of the Week 5 Sunday morning hangout. Is Bloom wearing pants or not? Folks, just go check out the video if you want. Go rewind if you want to see what we're talking about here. Gene, let's go back. All right, let's go back. Let's go right back to this. It's good. It's got to be fun. It's always got to be fun. Have fun, and the first rule is have fun, and the third rule
does Patreon allow that kind of thing?
It's only weird if you make it weird.
Yeah, and it is always weird. I mean, it's okay to be weird. Sometimes a fantasy football podcast is just a fantasy football podcast. But Gene, let's get serious now.
Killer Mike would like this.
Yeah, Killer Mike for president.
Layers upon layers upon
always.
layers.
It's like you have to rewind. Did he just say that? Okay. Getting serious again, though. Michael Gallup. This has been a situation where, and Gene, you've taught me to be very cognizant of what players say, and then how to interpret that through the lens of if a player is saying something, if they even are talking about their injury, that makes it have extra weight. Michael Gallup's basically saying that mentally he needed to understand that he could trust his knee. Now, it looks like he's going to play this afternoon in a great matchup, but should he be in our lineups considering everything we know about his return this week?
Yeah, I don't. He's going to be in high leverage situations. I don't think he's going to take all the full complement of snaps that he's done in the past. Not to play armchair psychologist here, but it seems like he was a little bit disappointed that he didn't recover at the very beginning of the timetable that he was given 2 to 4 weeks. Not that 3 weeks, there's any shame in that at all. But when you play for such a high profile team, when your owner is out there saying, well, think he'll be able to get back in 2 weeks, and he's saying, I don't feel ready yet. Well, it's rare. I mean, DK Metcalf was the exception, getting back in 2 weeks. Some players do that. A lot of players need 3 to 4 weeks. So I don't know that there was really a worrisome mental component to this at all, other than I really want to play. I really want to support my team. I really want to make good on what my owner is saying in the media every day to get back in 2 weeks. And when he couldn't, it doesn't mean that he's more injured. It doesn't mean that he's recovering slowly. It just means that it took a couple of extra days to be ready to go. So, and if he still wasn't quite right at the beginning of this week, it sounds like they didn't plan on putting him in the game plan in the same ways they were before. And Devin Smith has looked good. They've got other options with Jason Witten now that they didn't have last year necessarily. So they have the ability to kind of assimilate him back into the offense a little bit slowly. And that's what I expect to happen. But Michael Gallup on 4 to 5 targets and 30 to 40 snaps can be, we're not talking Calvin Johnson, Rob Gronkowski, Alshon Jeffrey level
Right.
here, returning from injury in those little areas. But it's not a poor option as a flex play. But yeah, I don't think we're seeing 60 snaps out of him today.
On the other side of this matchup, and I'm glad that this is going to be a game that we can pay extra attention to, Matt, because the NFC is wide open, and these are two teams that should consider themselves part of that picture in the NFC. But Green Bay's not going to have Devontae Adams for this one, so we can look at this in one of two ways or more. But this is the false dichotomy that I'll set up, Matt. One is that, hey, Aaron Rodgers is still Aaron Rodgers. Dallas' defense might be good, but he elevates the players around him that if you're on the fence, put Valdez-Scantling in, put Geronimo Allison in, put Jimmy Graham in, and we can even and we're not gonna have Jamal Williams in this one, so Aaron Jones, that's just on volume alone you're putting him. So there's those three targets. These are going to be, and Jake Kumaro. Tell me that Jake Kumaro didn't like re-hurt himself somehow on the way to the game for this one. He's actually going to play.
I think that's the expectation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Poor
So
guy.
I'm not playing Jake Kumaro, but I mean, I just want him to see him get a chance to break out. So Matt, we've got choices with Valdez-Scantling, with Allison, and with Graham. We can say, hey, it's Aaron Rodgers. He's going to elevate. He's going to find a way. Or we can say, hey, no, actually, Devontae Adams is that important to him in this offense, and you might want to back away from your Packers options in this matchup. What do you think?
I definitely think you're going to start Packers wide receivers and not worry so much about it's Devontae Adams or nothing in this particular offense. Allison is always a nice look because they seem to have good communication in the middle of the field. I think Valdez-Scantling, they'll try and engineer some looks for him, and he's the type of player. He does things well in a big play capacity that Adams does well, but Adams gets more of those looks. And I think that Valdez-Scantling gets more of the lower percentage looks than when Adams is on the field in certain cases. So I think I would expect him to have a pretty good day. And then if Whitewater Jesus does play, then you're, that's what somebody said on Twitter. I don't remember.
Nice.
I get credit for it, but you know who you are out there, and thank you. If Whitewater Jesus gets the opportunity, then he may bestow blessings upon the Packers faithful as well.
Matt, we should have a rule that any player that allows us to mention one of the satellite campuses of a major state university. Where did Thielen go? Like Minnesota Mankato or something like that?
Yeah.
Right. So these players, they get extra points for us. Gene, real quick, over in London today, are we going to see Tyrell Williams in the futile attempt for Oakland to play with the Bears?
I mean, I can't imagine. I don't put any stock whatsoever in Oakland's injury report. Cleveland Farrell, concussion, didn't practice all week long.
That's one of the quotes of the year right there.
Didn't practice all week long. They listed him questionable to play. So Tyrell Williams didn't practice all week with a foot. There's been tons of pessimism from what we've been able to see from the local writers. So you can't read into the injury report at all. I don't know what questionable means in Oakland. We just kind of go with the best of what we can. I don't like what I've been hearing, the fact that he didn't get back to any practice at all. We've not seen Oakland really do that where player doesn't practice at all. I mean, even Josh Jacobs and Tyrell Williams earlier this year when they were battling things, got back to a little bit of a practice towards the end of the week and were allowed to talk in the locker room. And that's not been the case with Williams. So I think he's not going to play.
Matt, what do you do with Stephon Diggs today? I mean, this is another one of those Jalen Ramsey situations where it's not just football stuff, but it is a game. And you can talk about Adam Thielen if you want to, because this is one of those squeaky wheel things where it wasn't just Diggs. Adam Thielen also speaking out. Is this a game against the Giants secondary where, at least for this week, you're happy you drafted a Vikings receiver?
Did they beg to bring back Kyle Sloter? That's what I want to know. Because I'm sure they were probably calling up and going, listen, we're going to try. We can't guarantee anything, but I can see those side conversations. Stephon Diggs, it's a tough situation because the Giants defense is bad. So you get an opportunity there. But at the same time, do you start him over Dante Pettis? Do you start him over a Paul Richardson even, who's averaging more points per week in PPR leagues than a guy like Diggs? That's the tough scenario. And I think it's one of those deals where as long as he's going to play, and the most recent news is that he's going to be active for the game. But,
I like how specific you got there. Yeah.
Yeah. Active for the game. That's all it is. That's all I'm reading is that, but the fact that when you miss practice, in the NFL and you miss meetings on top of that, that's kind of like usually you're cut if you do that kind of thing. So we don't really know what's going on here. So, the last time we had a major wide receiver miss a meeting, he got traded. That was Randy Moss back in the day. So it seems to me that, Mike Zimmer kind of has that same kind of probably feel that a Bill Belichick would in terms of those types of things. I'm still kind of wavering back and forth of whether I'm going to start Diggs or not, because the upside is he could have a big game and they figure like, listen, we'll showcase him and we'll trade him if he's on, if in this type of scenario, or they just, they have him active and they're just like, whatever, you're just going to be on the field a little bit and we'll target other guys. We're not even going to target you, because who knows what kind of dysfunction is going on in this particular scenario. And that's the tough part, is that if you have better options, I think Dante Pettis might be a better option this week, even though he's a lesser known. I definitely, you look at a Paul Richardson and say, that doesn't seem a lot of fun and reliable. But if McLaurin plays and Gilmore's on him, then Paul Richardson could be a better type of play. So it makes Diggs a flex play at best, and that's what he's been pretty much all season.
Gene, what app do you think Ben Roethlisberger uses most often on his Apple Watch?
I'm not going there today. It sounds like his wife is the one that has to push the buttons on the app too.
There you go. We all need a little help having our buttons pushed sometimes.
Is there a passive aggressive app? Like passive aggressive sayings and given for situations. Yeah.
So Matt, and you got to give it up for the Jets, like giving Sam Darnold all of the reps in practice this week, and poor Luke Falk has to go out there and play anyway. But if the button says Jordan Howard after what he did last week, understanding that this should be not even a fair fight between the Eagles and the Jets, do you go back to Jordan Howard, or are we still more agnostic about how the Eagles are going to deploy their running backs in any given week?
Listen, man, I'm going to say you mash that button and you keep mashing that button. And for anybody who's Northern who doesn't understand, that mash is a word similar to push. I once had a coworker try and correct a guy I knew who grew up down here, and saying that you use the word push, and he said, well, you don't push potatoes, do you? So I think that at this particular point, yeah, you take a look at Jordan Howard and you mash that button several times, because he's going to mash up this defense.
Gene, will there be any defense at all in the Arizona-Cincinnati game today?
I don't know. I like some of the edge rushers out there.
Yeah, it's sacks. So it's either going to be like 20-yard gains or sacks in this one.
I don't know. I mean, there's not a whole lot to like about Cincinnati's offense right now, unfortunately. So but defense by proxy, I guess, for offense in Cincinnati means good defense from Arizona. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not too jazzed about that one.
Is that something like Munchausen by proxy? Is that why you're not a fan anymore of the Bengals? Okay, Matt. So on that note, and we're winding down here for the last couple of minutes. Cincinnati, Arizona could be one of those games. So when we put two, I don't want to say they're bad teams. Okay. I mean, Arizona's maybe not as bad as Cincinnati. So sometimes when we put these two teams together, it's just bad football and it's just disappointing all around. But sometimes, like those old Cleveland Cincinnati matchups, like sometimes it turns into some crazy 45-42 kind of game. And some of the players implicated here would be like Auden Tate, for instance. Chase Edmonds. I'm really interested to see what Arizona does with Chase Edmonds this week. And of course, the quarterbacks, Kyler Murray, Andy Dalton, Tyler Eifert, against a matchup where the tight end facing the Cardinals has been either number 1 or number 2 in fantasy rankings for the week, every week. So is this going to be bad football, good for your fantasy team, or just bad all around?
I think it'll be bad and good for your fantasy team. And the guys you mentioned are intriguing, but unless you're playing hundreds of DFS lineups, you're probably not going to start any of those guys that were mentioned, unless you're just looking for a potential edge with a team that hits the lottery ticket. But you are starting guys like Larry Fitzgerald. You are going to start guys like Tyler Boyd. You're going to you're going to consider David Johnson for sure. And I think that certainly Kyler Murray and Andy Dalton are capable of having pretty large games this week. I mean, listen, I don't know who the Cardinals really have behind DJ Swearinger, and they cut him because basically he was a red carpet for tight ends pretty much the first 4 weeks, 3-4 weeks of the season. So, give it a shot.
Parting shots here before we go really quickly. If there's a Matt, if there's a bag left on your doorstep down here in New Orleans with Jameis Winston's fantasy line on it, if you open it up, is it a delicious shrimp po' boy or is it a bag of dog poop?
I think it could easily be a delicious shrimp po' boy with marinated in gasoline with an explosive timer on it. So I would say either way, it even if it looks good, you're still going to smell diesel fuel.
Are you dabbling in any Ronald Jones today? Or are we still saying, speaking of heat, the hot hand will make it difficult for us to decide which Tampa running back to play?
No, I think they're force feeding Ronald Jones, to be honest. They may say hot hand, but what they're doing is give him more experience. Let's give this guy more opportunities to get a little bit better. And he has gotten better each week on certain things. I mean, he's still not the advanced runner Peyton Barber is, but he's getting good enough to say that he's competent at those things. And because he's fast, because of the fact that he's getting competent, that speed's getting him into the second level and the third level of the defense more often. So yes, you take your chances on him and you bench Peyton Barber.
Yeah, runner up in the year 1 to year 2 transformation sweepstakes, Ronald Jones. Last one real quick, Matt, and Gene, you can weigh in real quick with you. Should people have any hesitation from a medical standpoint to play Melvin Gordon today?
No, I don't think so.
So, and what about from a fantasy standpoint, Matt? If you have Melvin Gordon, is it just as simple as you got Melvin Gordon, you're playing Melvin Gordon?
Yeah. Yeah. Not excited about it, but yes.
Not excited about that game. Denver going to face the Chargers, but we do have that Green Bay, Dallas. We always have each other. And, again, we have our devices and our wives and all the things that keep our lives full every week. Well, I just have to. It's anytime, Gene, and folks, look it up about. This is what happens whenever I'm in the bedroom.
On a bed.
Yeah, exactly.
He's talking about
it's Freudian.
And yeah,
it's all very Freudian. But look it up, folks. If you don't know what we're talking about, because the ongoing story here is, Gene is always so very clear-headed for us, and I like that Ben Roethlisberger gets your rankles up a little bit. And look it up, Ben Roethlisberger Apple Watch finds and plots, but we're here for you. You're here for us on Sunday mornings. We enjoy it so very much, and we enjoy taking this ride through the calendar, through the season with you, and even through the off season, because that's the kind of community we have here. Love the turnout on Sunday mornings. We really, really appreciate it. We really appreciate the support and the companionship and camaraderie here among everybody in our fantasy football community, our football guys community. So we appreciate that so much. You are always the very classiest.